Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're breaking down Ukraine's offensive strategy in the south, why many analysts say it's beginning to pay off, and what that really means as the war continues to evolve. The goal of this script is to give you a clear, engaging, and easy-to-follow explanation, with short paragraphs and a smooth flow from start to finish. Ukraine's southern offensive has always been one of the most strategically important parts of the war. The south carries incredible weight because it connects occupied territories in the east to Crimea, and it's filled with vital highways, railways, ports, and supply hubs that Russia depends on. So from the beginning, Ukrainian planners knew that if they wanted to weaken Russia's ability to sustain long-term operations, they had to put pressure on the south. But doing that wasn't just about pushing forward with tanks. It required patience, preparation, and a layered strategy designed to wear down Russian defenses before large movements even began. When Russian forces first took territory across southern Ukraine in 2022, they immediately began building up some of the most extensive defensive structures seen in Europe in decades. We're talking about massive trench systems, concrete obstacles, fortified bunkers, and minefields stretching for miles. Many military experts compared these defenses to Cold War-era fortifications, but even deeper and more complex. This meant Ukraine couldn't rely on fast, sweeping advances the way it did in Kharkiv. The South demanded a slower, more systematic approach. Ukraine began by attacking Russian logistics networks. Rather than rushing head first into the front line, Ukrainian forces targeted ammunition depots, command posts, and key bridges used by Russian supply trucks. By hitting these behind the lines targets with precision artillery and drones, Ukraine weakened Russia's ability to reinforce troops, move equipment, or maintain consistent firepower. This phase didn't produce dramatic territorial gains at first, but it set crucial conditions that later made Russian positions more vulnerable. As months passed, Ukraine continued shaping the battlefield. Long-range strikes destroyed Russian radar systems, fuel storage sites, and transport nodes. This forced Russia to move supplies farther away from the front, stretching their lines thin and complicating the movement of ammunition and reinforcements. And while all of this was happening, Ukrainian engineers worked on identifying safe paths through minefields and scouting weaknesses in Russian defensive layers. It was slow and extremely dangerous work, but it was necessary. Once the groundwork was laid, Ukraine began conducting probing attacks. These weren't designed to grab large areas, but to test Russian reactions, identify firing positions, and reveal hidden defenses. Every small engagement gave Ukraine new intel on where Russia was strong and where it was stretched thin. Over time, these small attacks also forced Russia to shuffle manpower constantly, sometimes moving troops from one weakened area to reinforce another. Eventually, this created gaps that Ukraine could take advantage of. One of the biggest indicators that Ukraine's strategy was paying off came when Russian units in certain parts of the south began to face shortages of artillery shells and even food deliveries. This happened because Ukrainian strikes disrupted supply routes so heavily that trucks couldn't safely reach forward positions. In some areas, Russian frontline units were relying on irregular deliveries or makeshift supply paths, making their operations increasingly unstable. As Ukraine pushed forward with careful infantry advances, supported by drones and artillery, they began breaking through the first Russian defensive lines in select areas. These were small breakthroughs at first, but symbolically and strategically important. They showed that Russia's heavily fortified positions weren't impenetrable. And once one section cracked, Ukraine could exploit that weakness by pushing more units into that area while continuing pressure elsewhere. A key part of why Ukraine has been able to make progress is its ability to adapt quickly. Whenever Russian forces changed their tactics, whether by using more drones, shifting artillery positions, or reinforcing certain villages, Ukraine adjusted its approach. This flexibility is one of the reasons analysts say Ukraine is successfully shaping the southern battlefield despite facing a larger and heavily entrenched opponent. Another major factor has been Ukraine's use of drones. From reconnaissance drones that map minefields to explosive-laden drones that strike vehicles and trenches, drones have become essential tools. They allow Ukrainian units to identify targets without exposing themselves. They also help avoid ambushes and direct artillery with high precision. In many cases, drone operations have saved Ukrainian soldiers from walking into dangerous mine belts or fortified positions. As Ukraine continued advancing, they adopted a method known as salami slicing. Instead of trying to take large areas quickly, they captured small positions one by one, gradually slicing away Russian defenses. Over time, these small gains added up. They moved trench by trench, tree line by tree line, village by village. The Russian army found itself repeatedly pushed back from positions it had spent months fortifying. One of the biggest payoffs came when Ukrainian forces managed to push near critical road networks in the south. These roads connect Russian-held territory to Crimea, and putting them within range of Ukrainian artillery changed the entire operational dynamic. Suddenly, Russia couldn't move supplies freely without risking destruction. This forced them to reroute convoys, increasing travel time, fuel use, and exposure to Ukrainian attacks. Another important payoff has been psychological. Ukraine's ability to break through strong defensive positions in the south has boosted morale among Ukrainian troops and civilians. It has also shaken confidence within segments of the Russian military. Soldiers defending the southern lines have reported lower morale, partly because they feel isolated and undersupplied. The more Ukraine pushes, the more pressure builds on these units, increasing the likelihood of breakdowns in discipline or retreat. On the international stage, Ukraine's southern offensive has also helped maintain support from its allies. Each successful Ukrainian advance, no matter how small, serves as proof that Western aid is making a difference. This encourages governments to continue providing weapons, ammunition, and training. In wars of attrition, maintaining political support is just as important as battlefield success. But that doesn't mean the campaign has been easy. Progress in the south has been slower than many hoped, partly because the conditions are extremely difficult. Minefields in some areas are so dense that tanks and armored vehicles can't move without specialized engineering equipment. Russian drones constantly search for Ukrainian units. Artillery duels take place day and night. And despite supply issues, Russia has a massive amount of fortifications already in place. Ukraine has to make every advance carefully to avoid unnecessary losses. This is one reason analysts describe the southern offensive as a long-term effort rather than a quick breakthrough. It's not just about reaching a city or pushing to a river. It's about wearing down Russian forces, cutting supply lines, limiting Russia's ability to attack elsewhere, and gradually shifting the balance of power. Another important part of why the strategy is paying off is the concept of cumulative pressure. Each strike, each destroyed depot, each captured trench adds a little more pressure. Eventually, pressure builds to a point where Russian forces can't hold certain positions anymore. This is how Ukraine was able to force previous Russian withdrawals in other regions. and it remains a realistic possibility in the south as well. Several Ukrainian tactics have proven especially effective. One is the use of small, mobile assault groups instead of large armored columns. These groups can move quickly, avoid detection, and exploit narrow breaches in Russian defenses. Another tactic is nighttime operations, which reduce the effectiveness of Russian surveillance drones. Ukraine also uses electronic warfare to jam Russian communications and disable drones, gaining temporary windows of opportunity to advance. The combination of these tactics has allowed Ukraine to slowly but steadily chip away at Russian positions. In some areas, Ukraine has advanced hundreds of meters or even several kilometers, which might sound small but represents a major achievement given the density of the defenses. Each of these gains disrupts the Russian defensive network and forces commanders to reconsider their deployment plans. One of the biggest strategic consequences of Ukraine's southern success is the increasing vulnerability of Crimea. For Russia, Crimea is not just a symbolic territory, it's a massive military hub. If Ukraine pushes far enough south to threaten the land routes connecting Crimea to mainland positions, Russia's entire logistics system could be destabilized. This is one of the reasons Russian commanders are pouring reinforcements into the south, even though doing so weakens other parts of the front. Another major impact of Ukraine's offensive effort is that Russia is forced to spend enormous resources simply defending. Instead of launching their own offensives, they're using troops, ammunition, and equipment just to hold ground. This reduces their capacity to attack elsewhere. In strategic terms, that alone is a form of Ukrainian success. Forcing the enemy to spend more than you, stretch themselves thin, and defend on unfavorable terms. Ukraine's strategy also shapes the political narrative. Every village liberated, every Russian retreat, every supply line cut sends a message that Ukraine is taking the initiative. For a country fighting to maintain global support, this narrative matters. It strengthens international trust and fuels domestic resilience. And it signals to Russia that Ukraine is not only resisting, but actively reclaiming control of its territory. Despite these advantages, it's important to remember that Ukraine's offensive is still ongoing. The gains so far are meaningful, but the ultimate goals breaking through deeper layers of Russian defenses, cutting off critical routes, and pressuring Crimea remain challenging. The road ahead involves continued battles, adaptation, and sustained support from allies. Looking forward, Ukraine is focusing on several priorities to maximize the payoff of its southern strategy. One is expanding control over supply routes that Russia depends on. Another is using precision strikes to further weaken Russian command structures. A third is accelerating, demining efforts to enable larger maneuvers. Alongside these efforts, Ukraine continues pushing for advanced weapons from international partners to increase the effectiveness of both offensive and defensive operations. As the months progress, the Southern Offensive will likely continue to play a defining role in the wider conflict. Even if progress remains gradual, each step forward shapes the battlefield, influences Russian strategy, and impacts the overall balance of power. For Ukraine, the steady weakening of Russian defenses, the accumulation of tactical victories, and the disruption of enemy logistics are all signs that their approach is delivering real results. In the end, what makes Ukraine's strategy in the south stand out is not just territorial gains, but the strategic consequences of those gains. By pressuring the south, Ukraine directly targets Russia's military lifelines. By forcing Russia to pour resources into defending this region, Ukraine limits the enemy's ability to conduct offensive operations elsewhere, and by consistently advancing, even in small increments, Ukraine shows that determination and smart planning can overcome even deeply fortified positions. The Southern Offensive is a long, difficult, and costly campaign, but it is one with meaningful progress and promising momentum. It demonstrates Ukraine's ability to adapt, innovate, and apply pressure at critical points. And while the future remains uncertain, the signs so far indicate that Ukraine's efforts in the south are indeed paying off, both on the ground and in the broader strategic picture. Thank you for watching and for staying informed. If you want more detailed breakdowns, battlefield analyses, or updates as the situation evolves, be sure to stay tuned and keep following the channel.